Welcome back, everyone. For today's video, we are going to be taking a look at day 5 of the Battle of the Generations between YouTuber and aspiring Grandmaster candidate Levy Rozman and Grandmaster Pia Cramling. Now, you guys are probably wondering, where was my recap from yesterday when they played the 4th game of classical chess? Now, unfortunately, I was flying back from St. Louis to Fort Lauderdale, Florida, but I had a bunch of delays, a cancellation, and eventually I got home around midnight, so I was unable to do the recap. Now, Pia was leading with 1 win in classical and 2 draws heading into the 4th game. Levy was able to strike back with the black piece and get a huge win. Now, the game went into a rook and pawn endgame. Pia defended very well, but unfortunately at the end, she got a little bit too low on time, lost a little bit of perspective, and ended up getting flagged in a drawn position, which means that the match is all square at 6-6 headed into the rapid portion. Now, the players are playing 5 games of rapid chess today with a time control of 15 minutes plus 10-second increment. Games are worth 2 points each, and I believe that the momentum has switched to the side of Levy because Levy is I think Levy is actually half the age that Pia is, and on top of that, he plays a lot of Blitz online. Blitz is a younger player's game, and even though it's rapid, you have to make a lot of decisions much quicker. So, first 2 games, very tightly contested, ended in a draw, and now we're going to start with the 3rd game of the rapid portion with Levy having the white pieces and Pia playing with the black pieces. So, let's jump right into the action. So, the game starts out with c4. Pia plays e5, Levy goes knight c3, bishop b4, queen c2, knight f6, knight f3, queen e7, and Levy plays a3. Now, up to this point, all this is pretty standard so far. They did play this in one of the classical games earlier, but I really like this approach from Levy, keeping it simple. So we get takes here. Now we get to move d6. Levy plays b4. And at this point, Levy has a lot of straightforward plans involving bishop b2 to fianchetto the bishop. You can play g3. So for example, g3 followed by bishop g2 in the diagonal. You can also play e3 here, developing the bishop to e2. But a lot of the play is very free-flowing and easy in this position. So after b4, Pia decides to castle. Levy goes bishop b2. Levy also, of course, has the bishop pair, whereas Pia has D's knights. So we get the move rook e8, Levy plays e3, b6, bishop e2, bishop c5, we get castles, and now we have bishop b7. Slight mistake, slip of the tongue there by me, thinking that bishop b7 was played first. But at this point, after d3 and knight d7, we're out of the opening phase of the game and into the middle game. Now, the big thing for Pia here is she has a bit of a big black center with the pawns on e5 and c5, trying to stop white from pushing d4 and hoping to use the long diagonal. So Levy goes rook e1, a very good move here because after rook a8 is played, now Levy plays the move d4 and his point is quite clear. The rook on e1 guards the bishop on e2, so if black were to trade twice, suddenly the bishop on e2 is guarded. Additionally, what you're really hoping for in the long run is to open up scope for these bishops. So after d4, we get to move knight to e4, Levy plays queen c2, and now we get to move knight g5, offering the trade of the knights. Here, we get to move b takes c5 from Levy, and this is actually a fairly serious mistake. It would be interesting to hear why Levy did not trade the knights on g5 here, because after takes and bishop f1, white maintains an advantage. The bishop guards the pawn on g2. You still have ideas like rook a d1. You want to open up the center of the board by taking the pawn on e5, and as you can tell from the valuation bar, this is a significant advantage, which is a little bit surprising to me, but also not that surprising because the pair of bishops in top-level chess means a lot. So instead we get b takes c5, Pia trades off on f3, and now Levy ends up in this situation where he's a compromised pawn structure on the king side, but he's banging on the power of the dark square b. So we get pawn takes pawn, and here Pia plays a rather surprising move, knight takes e5. Now, I actually thought that Pia would take with the pawn here because the pawns on f2 and f3 are a little bit soft here. I think the reason she didn't do it is she's probably worried that after king to h1, she saw something like rook to g1 here, just to illustrate a couple of things. You can play on the d file. You can also now play on the g file as well. And with the bishop and the 2 rooks here, it actually looks very good for white. Now, the funny thing is that here I've actually given white a lot of extra moves here where black has done nothing. But if black were to play f6, the advantage is still very, very minimal. And this speaks to how the bishop can look like a really great piece in some situations, but you really have to analyze move by move and calculate to see whether the bishop or the knight are better in this situation. So instead, we get to move knight takes pawn here from Pia. We get takes, and now after queen to e4 here, Levy has a nice position here. He can put the rook on either the b1 or the d1 square. You're trying to claim these open files. He has a queen on e4 as well. Better place than the queen on e7, a little bit more centralized here. And so now, if anybody is better, it's Levy, and all the danger that existed a couple of moves ago is simply gone. So we now get queen to e6 from Pia. Levy goes rook a b1. We get f5, and now we have the move queen d5. Here Pia plays rook c to d8. She does not trade the queens, by the way, because one very important concept here is that even here after c4, black is fine, but if you were to go rook d8 and e4, white gets this protected pass pawn. You can go for the kebab with rook to b7, and black's position is simply very difficult to defend. So we get rook c d8. Levy trades the queens. He does not get greedy here and try to grab the pawn on c5, because after queen g6, king h1, and queen to h5, suddenly this pawn on f3 is very weak. If you go queen 6, there's even e4, and suddenly the black queen is going after the white king here on h1, and your king is very, very weak here. Computer still thinks it's okay, but you would never go into this in a normal game of chess. Now after rook c d8, we get the trade of the queens. Levy plays rook to b5, and here we get the move rook c6 guarding the pawn. Game continues with rook b7, and now we get this move rook g6. Now this is a move that I did not like when I saw it being played live. I thought that rook to d2 made a lot more sense here, because now the rook is very active, but most importantly, if white tries to grab the pawn here, you can go check, king to h1, and now you have this move rook over to b6 with the idea of rook to b2, creating the classic double stack on the second rank. And white actually has nothing better here than to simply make a draw by repetition. If you were to go rook e2, for example, there's check, hitting the king, you block, and after rook b2, now black is completely winning. So I would have liked to have seen rook d2. I think if this were a classical game, Pia would have played the move, playing for the activity, but I also think that there's another very important thing in play here, which is you see the time situation. Now Pia is up 3 minutes in this game, and I think one of the things that Pia is trying to do at this point in the match is she knows what her biggest weakness is and what Levy will try to pounce on, which is that when she gets low on time, she won't be able to find the best moves, and Levy will just play much better or outplay her completely. So she's trying to move very quickly to build these time advantage, not get into a situation where she can get flagged. But one of the dangers in such a situation, when you're playing really fast, you have to have this sort of sixth sense where you can slow it down at the critical moments. And I think that Pia here actually she's so worried about the time situation, it's really like glued into her mind. It's what she's worried about the most, that she doesn't spend a lot of time in some of these moments. So we get rook h6. Levy decides to take here. If Levy were to go back to g1, the game would probably end in a draw by repetition. So we get rook a7. Pia now takes on h2. Levy goes king to g1. We get the move rook h4, and now we have this move rook b1. Now Levy is trying to go for the double stack on the 7th rank here to go after the black king, and here Pia plays this move rook takes c4, which is still fine, but it makes the defensive task quite a bit more difficult. Now this position, what Pia should have played was this very quiet move, either h6 or h5. Let's just say h6. So it makes a little bit more sense than h5 here. And if white plays rook b7, creating the double stack, you can go check, king g2, and now after this move rook h to h1, all of a sudden from out of nowhere, you're threatening to checkmate the white king. White plays f4. Actually, I guess this one is losing by 4, so you can't do it. I was trying to illustrate a point. If you were to go to f4 trying to escape, there's always an e4 idea to lock the king in. So white has to take, and after king h8, check king g8. White will have to make a draw here. If you push the pawn, for example, rook g1 is checkmate. If you go f4, there's actually a forced mate here, I believe, with I believe it's check here and then e4, and now actually you cover the g7 square, and you're going to go rook h1 and rook g1 on the next 2 turns to checkmate the white king. So if Pia had found h6 here, Levy almost for sure would have played this move, and then I think that the game would have ended in a draw here, but instead she goes for another logical move, rook takes pawn. However, Pia plays this move in 5 seconds, and this is what I was saying earlier about the time usage, where it's very hard, because when it's in your mind that when you get low on time, you're going to blunder, you have to maintain the edge. There still are some moments where you have to really be able to dig deep and find that intuitive sense, or that sixth sense where you should slow down because the time isn't going to matter anymore. Now, the reason I mention this on top of the fact there's a line with h6 is that at this point in the game, we're in a rook and pawn endgame here. So we're in a rook and pawn endgame. If you get to a situation where it's a technical draw, like a force draw, like rook and 2 versus rook and 1, something along these lines, you will be able to draw it no matter how low you get on the clock, because with a 10-second increment, you will always be able to move within the limit. So Pia goes rook c4. Now Levy plays rook b7, and here we get the move king to h8. Levy takes, we get rook g8, takes, and now the move rook e7. Now the position is still a draw here, but it's getting a little bit dangerous now because all your pawns are very weak. c5, e5, f5, all very loose in this position, and Pia plays this move f4 after a 3-minute thing, and this is a blunder that doesn't lose the game, but it's a blunder after which it becomes very, very difficult to defend. What Pia should have played here was the more natural move e4, because if white takes, you simply take back here. And I assume Pia thought that at some point she was going to end up in an endgame like this, for example. But after rook to a4, there's a very very well, I shouldn't say easy because obviously at my level this would be easy, but it's a very easy theoretical draw to play. She probably was worried that after king g3, king g7, and king f4 she'd lose this pawn on e4. White would push the 2 pawns up the board, but you can quite simply play rook to a2. After the king goes back, you simply go here. If white ever plays rook e5, you can go king f6. If king f4 here, again you have rook to a2, hitting the pawn on f2, and white can't really ever make progress and win this pawn on e4 without losing the pawn on f2. Now, the reason that I mention all of this is because maybe not so much being natural. When you're up 3 minutes on the clock here in the situation, the one thing you have to, there are a couple things that will go through my mind here just to put you guys in my brain here, which is the first thing is I would know that this is a draw. You know this endgame is a draw. The question is, where are the best chance to make a theoretical draw? Now, the reason f4 is actually a very dangerous move to play here is because now after e4, white keeps more pawns on the board. If white can get to a situation, I'm just going to illustrate something like this. Even if white can get to the situation with the 3 pawns on the board, if you can win this pawn at f4, it is GG. You're going to win this game because you keep this pawn cluster here. So in my mind, I would be thinking that at this point I've got to exchange some pawns. If the more pawns you can exchange, the more likely the game will be a draw. But instead, after f4 e4, now Pia continues on with rook c3. We get the move rook takes e5 here. Apparently rook to a4 would have been enough to draw, by the way, but even this one, frankly, when I look at it as a human, after takes rook a3, king g2, or wait, no, this after, wait, where's the draw? Rook e5, you're supposed to go c4, rook c5 takes, and after king g2, now you have rook c3, and after rook f5, rook d3. Apparently this is a draw after takes and rook to d7, because you're going to put the rook behind the pass pawn and push it up the board. But frankly, even if I were playing this game, I'm not sure that I would spot this idea. It's very, very difficult. And when you put yourself in a situation where the margin becomes really, really fine, and you might have only one way to draw the game, as opposed to having 3 or 4, that's when it's going to be very difficult to defend. So after f4 e4, Pia plays the move rook c3. We get rook takes e5, rook takes f3, Levy takes the pawn, takes, and now he plays an all-star move rook g5 check. Now the reason this move is so great is that if the king goes to the f file, you can simply play the move king g2 and rook f5, and you're going to be winning the pawn on f4. And after we get king h8, king g2, now the king is cut off. It's 1 square further away, or 1 file further away from the pawn on e4, which is going to start marching up the board. And at this point, I think there's almost no chance that Pia can save the game, even though she has 1 more minute on the clock. And I think this really speaks to how when you build the time advantage, there are some critical moments you need to use that time well, but you also need to find the best moves, and Pia unfortunately is unable to do that. So we get f3, Levy goes king g3, we get h6, Levy plays rook g4, and now we get the move king h7, and here we have this move e5. Now what's funny about this idea is that Levy's playing for a concept here. He's playing for a concept which is to ignore the pawns on the f file, simply push this e pawn up the board because the king is cut off, and walk the king over. Now the computer of course will tell you that you should go rook to f5 here, and after like king g7, rook f3, rook a4, and then something like rook to e3 followed by king f4. Let's just set it up something like this, for example, not rook f3, sorry, f3, that white is completely winning in this position with the 2 central pawns that will start to march up the board. But I actually like Levy's decision here, even if the computer laughs at it, because it's a very unnerving idea to have to face, because you're thinking here, you're so tunneled, especially when players are at 1 minute or less, on the idea of white taking the pawn. And then when Levy goes for this concept with e5, which is a very simple idea just to showcase it, which is to keep pushing the pawn and marching the king up the board while ignoring everything on the f file, just keep pushing P with the king escorting the pawn, it's very difficult because it's not what you're expecting at all, and Pia starts to go wrong. So here she plays rook a5. Maybe this is still technically a draw after king f4 and the move h5, but Pia blunders here with the move rook to a4. This simply loses the game on the spot. I think at this point she saw h5, or she mentioned it very briefly in the post-mortem, and after rook to g1, king h6, e6, now there's a very weird idea with rook to a2, hitting the pawn on f2. If white goes e7, you have rook e2, not rook d2, sorry, rook e2 stopping the pawn. If white takes the pawn here, now you have rook to a6, rook to e1, and now you go rook a8, you bring the king over, and apparently this is a draw somehow. Even here, I'm actually really confused as to why this is a draw. Apparently you can check from the side, and wow, and it's still a draw. But honestly, I don't think I would find this. I don't think anybody who's human or not non-computer would find this idea to save the game, but it does exist, which also shows how slippery endgames are. That even here, when you look at it optically as a human, you think it's over, but it actually is not. So we get rook to a4 check instead, and now Levy takes the pawn. I think Pia saw king f5, and after the trade and king king g6, king f3, king f5, the game would end in a draw. But instead, Levy takes the pawn. Now you can't trade the rooks. Now your king is cut off. White's just going to push p on the e and f files, and it's totally hopeless. The game concludes after rook a6, king e4, h5, we get rook g1, king h6, king f5, h4, and after f4, Pia Cramling resigns this game as Levy is just going to escort the pawns with the king marching. Pawn on h4 isn't going anywhere. If you ever go h3, I can simply play rook h1, rook a3, and king g4. Not even the most precise way, but I'll win the pawn, and with the two connected passers, it's GG, why not? So a big win for Levy in this third rapid game. With that, he takes the lead in the match for the first time and will now move on to the fourth game. So Pia has just lost a very tough game has lost a very tough match, his third game on the rapid portion. She's now trailing for the first time, and let's see how she's going to respond. So we got the move d4. Levy plays knight f6, we get c4, and now we have the move e6. We get knight f3, d5, knight c3, and knight bd7. Now, one thing that I want to point out that is really impressing me with Levy's play in some of the turns is his repertoire against d4 is very, very solid. He has a lot of different ideas in the bag. He's played these a6 lines. He also played knight f6, h6 yesterday, I think, against Pia. He's got a lot of these little tricky lines. He's getting these very set structures where you get this trade on d5, for example, and then after bishop g5, c6, you have this Carlsbad pawn structure. Now, it's very good because when you play systems with set pawn structures, you can learn the ideas, and generally, even if you put a pawn on h6 or you put a pawn on a6 randomly, it's always the same pawn structure in the center of the board, and a lot of the ideas tend to be very similar, if not, in fact, the exact same, even if you have these very slight differences with pawns moving on some random squares. So, we get queen c2. Levy plays h6, Pia goes bishop f4, and now we get to move bishop b4, and here Pia plays a3. Now, what I will say about this is it's clear that Levy, he's studying a little bit in terms of structure, but he does not have the lines memorized by heart, because when he plays h6 and bishop b4, this is simply not the correct way of playing the position. From a theoretical standpoint, if you're going to go for bishop b4, you should actually play it right away in this position after knight c3, or right here after bishop g5 with bishop b4. And the reason for that is usually when you put the bishop on b4, you want to keep the option alive to play either c6 or put the pawn on c5. So we keep going, but we got bishop f4, Levy goes bishop b4, probably bishop to e7 would have made more sense, or knight to h5, also a very thematic idea when the bishop can't retreat to the h2 square, but instead we got bishop b4. Pia goes a3, and now Levy plays move queen a5. We get rook c1, and here the move bishop e7 is played. Now, this already is quite seriously wrong, I would say, from a theoretical standpoint in terms of the way Levy has played this. But again, it's a rapid game. Both players, I think, a little bit tired. They've played many games already, and so it's not going to make a difference, which is one of the reasons that I would say that when you play rapid chess and blitz chess, it can be a lot more fun because it's more about practical moves versus absolute pure perfect play with precision. So we get bishop e7. Pia plays knight d2, Levy plays knight h5, we got knight b3, attacking the queen on a5, queen b6, and now the move bishop d2. Levy castles, we get the move e3, logical move, create the pawn chain, guard the pawns, and now develop the bishop to d3, and go after the black king on the long diagonal. Now here Levy plays move f5, and this is actually a big mistake according to the computer. I understand why Levy did this. He probably thinks, well, I'm going to play f5, knight f6, g6, consolidate the center of the board here, and everything is great. However, after f5 is played, we got bishop d3, and now we have this move g6. Computer still says knight f6 and black's okay here because white can't take the pawn, so she would hang the horse on b3 and lose the game. Levy goes g6 instead. Now, the funny thing is, I'm sure that Levy had to realize during the game that what he was doing here was completely wrong. But at the same time, because Pia does not have endless time to think here, it's very tricky finding the exact setup. And for Levy, his moves here become very natural. You want to go knight f6 and knight e4, maybe knight g7, but all of your next couple 3-4 moves, you'll play set moves no matter how white responds. And because of that, in a rapid game, it's much harder to play from the white side because you have to come up with a plan. Levy's moves are all pure reactions to whatever white does. So here Pia plays h3. In this position, I think computer prefers knight to e2 very slightly, but we're going to get that anyway in a few moves. We get h3, knight to f6, g4, and now we have the move knight g7. Here we get the move knight to e2, and now Levy actually plays the best move, queen to d8. If Levy were careless here and plays a move like pawn takes pawn, for example, thinking that he's doing great, white has a very nasty move, bishop to a5, trapping the queen on b6. Queen has no squares here. You're doing a Botez gambit, and you will resign in a very embarrassing fashion. So we get queen to d8, avoiding this bishop a5 nastiness, and here Pia plays the move rook g1, which is a big mistake. Now at this point, you'll probably notice the computer says that white should play the move knight to f4 here, going after the pawn on g6, and after queen to e8 guarding the pawn, now Pia should trade on f5. And the reason that this is different than the game is that now if black were to try and trade everything off on f5, after rook to g1, it's uh-oh spaghetti-o time, the g file is opening up, you're getting killed on the diagonal, again you're going to resign very, very soon. So when Pia plays rook to g1, the problem with this move is now Levy can play knight to e4, and most importantly, if white takes on f5 here, for example, black can simply take with the bishop, and now your king is very snug and safe on g8 with the pawn and the knight in front. Now you're threatening to hit f2 with bishop h4 or knight d2 as well, and all of a sudden everything is gone for Pia. Now what I would say about this game and just this general flow of the match in general is very clear to me that Pia is trying very hard to avoid tactical games. She's trying very hard to keep the game completely under control, and I think that's what leads to this decision to not play the move knight to f4, even though it is by far and away the most natural move. She's probably thinking, you know what, I want to try and go over these deep positional concepts and avoid heavy tactics. And I think if she had played knight to f4 here, she probably would have won this game. So if you go g5 knight g6, now the pawn on f5 is hanging, and after queen e8 takes, the computer says the best line is to take, and after gf5 rook g1, now white has the open file. Let's just say, I mean, I don't even know what, I guess bishop d6 to avoid knight e6. Looks very hard to play bishop d6 in this position. I think that king h7, for example, much more logical, but even here there are tricks like knight e6 with queen f5, even a positional move like bishop b4 here, and after takes, white is doing very, very well. A lot of weaknesses everywhere in the black position, but instead we don't get this. We get rook g1, Levy correctly plays knight e4, and as soon as I saw this, I knew that Levy would win this game. So we get the move knight g3 from Pia. Levy plays bishop h4, very nice move here, now putting maximum pressure on the center of the board with this great bashing. You also of course have a mini pyramid here. We get the move bishop to b4, Levy plays rook f7, we get takes, pawn takes, and now the move knight d2. Now I had a feeling Pia would play the move knight d2, but what's funny about this position is the computer actually thinks after king d1 with the idea of going bishop to e1 and guarding f2, black is only very slightly better here. Of course this would never happen in any human game, but it's still funny to note that king d1 is a decent move. So instead we get the move knight d2, and now Levy goes a5, we get bishop c3, and here I was very impressed to see Levy play the move knight to g5, and not only did he play it, he played it quickly. Now this move is a great move here because what you do is you target the pawn on h3, you're threatening to go f4, even knight f3 maybe down the road, and here it's just too much to expect someone to defend from the white side. So Pia goes bishop f1. Actually, I think if Pia had played f4, knight takes h3, and king to e2, playing a bomb cloud while sacking the rook on g1, this could have still been a very interesting game after knight takes rook and rook takes knight, because now white can go knight to f3 and knight e5, creating the bastion and a diamond hands formation in the center of the board. And I'm not actually sure that black is even better here. I guess black is according to the computer, but very, very hard to play with the pressure on the g file and all these active white knights and the bishop on d3. Instead, Pia goes bishop to f1, and now Levy plays f4, and after this the game is just over. Black is crashing through, white's king is stuck in the middle of the board. You've moved the rooks to c1 and g1, and unlike Fisher Random, there's no magic castle here. The king is stuck in the middle of the board, bishop's coming in, the e file and f file are opening up, and white is just getting crushed. So Pia trades, we get the move queen to d3, Levy plays queen e7, we get queen e3, and now we get the move queen takes queen. Now Pia could have tried king d1, but after rook f2 with bishop f5 coming, all these pieces are so misplaced here. Black king very safe with the knights here. White simply has all these pieces that are just doing nothing. Even the bishop on c3, for example, just staring at a completely closed diagonal. So it's a wooden shield, but it's basically like a big pawn in this position. So we get queen e3, Levy trades, he goes rook to f3, sacking the rook. Not the only way to win. Knight f3 also good enough, but after rook to f3, we get takes. If white doesn't take the rook here, say you go king e2, after takes, black wins the game. So we get takes, and here Pia resigns after king to f2, knight g1, takes, black is an extra horse on the board, and it's just totally hopeless. So with that one, Levy has now won 2 games in a row as they head into the 5th rapid game of the day, the final game they're going to be playing, I believe, and let's jump right into the action. So in this one, Levy is the white pieces here against Pia. We get the move d4, d5, and Levy returns back to his roots of playing the London system. Pia goes c5, we get the move e3, knight c6, knight d2, and now we have the move knight to h5, attacking the bishop on f4. Levy goes bishop to e5, we get the move f6, bishop g3, and now Pia takes the bishop on the square. Now this is a mistake here. What black should play is black should trade the pawns on d4 and play g6, and the reason for this is that you don't need to take the bishop immediately. You can wait to take until the right moment here, as we're about to see in the game, because if white were to play bishop d3, the very logical move here, now you can play a move like bishop to g7, and after white castles, now you can take on g3 and play something like e5, or maybe just castles followed by e5, and it's a very rich game with chances for both sides. Instead, Pia instantly gobbles, trades on d4, and now she goes g6, and here Levy plays the move bishop d3, and now Pia makes a huge blunder with this move bishop to g7, and after this the game is kind of over. I suspect that Pia, let's not forget that she is more than twice Levy's age, or right around twice Levy's age. I believe she's something like 60 or 61. Levy is 30. I think playing all these games all in one day definitely taking a toll on her. The quality is dipping, and she just makes a basic oversight. Now what she had to play here was go king f7, trying to guard the pawn on g6, and after c3, something like king to g7, queen c2, and maybe like queen d6. Maybe I guess queen e2 is better than queen c2, but something with the king on g7 trying to build a big black center with e5 would have been better. Instead, she plays this move bishop g7, allowing Levy to follow the memes by sacking the rook, with rook takes pawn, and now she regrettably has to go king f7, because after it takes, bishop takes g6, king f8 takes. White has 2 extra pawns on the king side, black's king is terrible, and it's just GG. So she goes king f7, we got the trade, c3, now we got the move queen to h1, Levy plays knight to f1, we got e6, and now we have the move queen c2. Now, I'm not really going to do a lot of commentary on this game because Levy's basically up a pawn here. It's mostly a matter of good technique here, and he's not going to slip up, as we'll see. We got knight e7, castles, queen h6, king to b1. Here, bishop d7 is played, and now Levy goes rook to e1, trying to stack the piece on the e file. Pia goes b5, we get g4, queen f4 here, and now Levy finds a very good move, queen to e2, not only because it targets the pawn on b5, but it also stops black from taking the pawn on g4, and you put pressure on the e file at the same time with the double stack. Now, black were to take, you walk into a fossil with knight to e5, checking the king. After takes, it's GG on the spot, and you resign. So we get rook to b8, guarding the pawn on b5. Levy plays g3, we get queen c7, knight bd2 with the idea of going knight b3 and knight c5 with a bastion, and here Pia plays b4. Levy goes c4. Of course, he does not want to trade and open up the b file for the rook here. Suddenly black might have chance to attack the white king, but when you go c4, now this file remains closed and black simply has no attack. Pia plays rook c8, we get rook c1, queen b8, Levy goes knight to b3 here with the idea of jumping to c5. You get a bastion while forking the bishop and the pawn. We get pawn takes pawn, bishop takes, knight d5, knight c5, queen d6, and now Levy plays the move g5. Now this is a very, very good fundamental move because after g5 f5, we get knight to d3, and here Levy is creating a bastion or an outpost with the knight on e5, hitting the pawn and the bishop, and at this point, black can pretty much resign. Pia goes king g8, we got knight e5, bishop e8, Levy goes f4, over protecting the knight on e5 here. Now both of D's bishops are very bad. Bishop on e8, it guards the pawn, but only has one diagonal. Bishop on g7, walled in by the knight and the pawns. Pia plays knight b6, and now Levy jumps to c5 with the knight, hitting the pawn on e6. We get takes, and I believe around this point Pia resigns. I didn't actually, I think it went queen d5. We got queen to a6, rook c7, queen takes pawn, takes, and at this point Levy simply has 2 knights versus 2 bishops. We got bishop to h8, d5, and I believe this was the end of the game, or maybe it went on a few more moves. I'm not 100% sure, but at any rate, Levy wins a 3rd game in a row in the rapid portion. He ends on a very high note. It's quite clear that Pia started falling apart at the end of this. She simply, whether you want to say it's energy, whether it's becoming a little bit tilted, wasn't able to keep up the level, and Levy simply pounces and he dominates this 5th day of the match. So you're probably wondering, what are my general thoughts? And my general thoughts are actually quite simple. Levy is playing quite well. I've actually been very impressed by his play in the rapid, but even in the classical portion, it feels like he's come up with these very, very nuanced setups, these slight deviations, whether it's h6 on move 2, whether it's playing a6, and it seems as though Pia is not super well prepared for these lines, and Levy's able to get out of the opening, he's able to play chess, and he's been doing extremely well. Now, on the other side, I would argue Pia's done a couple things very well. It's very clear that when she has time on the clock and she gets a position, she can still play very well, or the class doesn't just disappear overnight. But at the same time, I actually want to evoke a different comparison, which is I recently played in the Chess 9 LX in St. Louis, Missouri, alongside the great world champion Garry Kasparov. And in that event, Gary actually got a lot of very good positions where he's winning games. He was much better, if not winning games, out of the opening. But as soon as he got low on time, it just all started to fall apart. And I think that when I look at Pia, she still is great class. She's still a great player, obviously. But the big issue is that she's just a little bit past her prime. And at the age that she's at, much like with Garry Kasparov, there's just little things that don't work as well. And when you get low on time, your brain just kind of you can't really keep together in the same way. And so it's kind of sad to see on the one hand, but on the other hand, I would tell you that from my own personal experience, there is zero chance that I will be playing chess at the ages that say Pia and Gary are at. So I do admire what they're doing, because I just could not do that. So I greatly admire the fact they love chess so much, and they're great champions and keep playing at the age they're at. So at any rate, Levy dominates the rapid portion. I'm unfortunate to tell you guys, I think tomorrow the blitz is going to be even worse. I expect Levy to win by a big margin and for the whole thing to turn into a complete blowout. But at any rate, we've had a couple of very competitive days. It's been a fun match to watch overall. And I hope you guys have enjoyed this recap, even though I haven't been able to do it every day. So on that note, hope you guys have enjoyed this recap from the Battle of the Generations being played in Stockholm, Sweden. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, make sure that you smash that subscribe button below, and we'll be back with some more great recaps in the coming days. I'll see you guys. Have a good one. Bye.